The lights of Family Feud glowed in that soft, honey gold warmth, the kind that made laughter feel easy and moments feel timeless. It was Tuesday, March 12th, 2024. Inside the bustling Atlanta studio, the crowd cheered, the cameras rolled, and Steve Harvey in his tailored suit and easy smile stood ready to host another round of family fun. On his left stood the Mitchells, a lively family from Texas. Their patriarch, Marcus, a 2-year-old construction worker with strong hands and kind eyes, stood proud beside his mother Dorothy, his brother James, his sister Patricia, and his wife Angela, who stood quietly at the far end of the line. On the right stood the Garcias, a warm, competitive family from Florida. Everyone laughed easily. Everything felt like every other joyful episode. Except Steve noticed something behind Angela's polite smile. She clapped when her family won points, but her eyes drifted to her phone between questions. Her laughter didn't quite reach her eyes. Steve had hosted long enough to recognize that look, the look of someone trying to be present while part of their heart was miles away. When the show paused for a commercial break, Steve walked over to her. The lights dimmed. The studio hushed. "You all right, sweetheart?" he asked gently. "You look like you got something heavy on your heart." Angela forced a small smile. "I'm fine, Mr. Harvey. It's just, today's a special day." Steve tilted his head. "Special how?" Her voice trembled. "It's my daughter's 10th birthday," she said. "And her daddy, he's in Afghanistan. He's missing it again, 3rd year in a row." Steve's face softened. The cameras weren't rolling, but his empathy was real. "How long's he been gone this time?" 14 months, she whispered, then added, with a shaky laugh, "But who's counting, right?" Steve reached out, resting a hand gently on her shoulder. "Your husband's a hero, Angela. And so are you. Holding it down back home, that's no small thing." Angela's eyes glistened. The stage manager called for places, and the show rolled on. But something about her sadness stayed with Steve. He could feel it echoing beneath the laughter, somewhere between the game and the truth. When the families advanced to the fast money round, Angela was chosen to go first. She stepped up to the podium, took a deep breath, and nodded to Steve. "All right, Angela," he said, his tone both host and human. "You've got 20 seconds to answer 5 questions. You ready?" "Ready as I'll ever be," she whispered. The countdown began. Name something people do when they miss someone. Cry themselves to sleep. Name a holiday that's hardest to celebrate alone. Christmas. Name a number of months that feels like forever. 14. Name something a child wishes for. Their daddy to come home. Name something that makes you strong. "Love," she said, tears breaking loose. "Love makes you strong." The buzzer sounded, but there was no laughter, no applause, only quiet reverence. Even the audience could feel it. These weren't answers to a game. They were confessions from the heart. Steve walked to her side, handed her a handkerchief. "You did good, baby girl," he said softly. "You did real good." As the crew prepared for Marcus's turn, the energy shifted again. Something unexpected stirred behind the scenes, something no one in Family Feud history had ever seen before. The executive producer, Marcus Freeman, suddenly walked onto the stage during filming. The audience gasped. Even Steve froze. The man held a phone, his face grave. "Steve," he said into the mic, "you need to take this call, right now." Steve blinked. "Man, we're in the middle of the show. Can't it wait?" Freeman shook his head. "No, it absolutely can't. Trust me," the audience murmured, confused. The cameras kept rolling. Steve hesitated, then took the phone. "Hello? This is Steve Harvey." A faint, crackling voice came through the speaker. "Mr. Harvey, this is Lieutenant Colonel James Morrison, calling from Bagram Air Base in Afghanistan." Steve's eyes widened. He looked instinctively toward Angela, her hand flew to her mouth. "Yes, sir," Steve said carefully. "We've got Angela Mitchell here." "Mr. Harvey," the colonel said, "I'm calling about Staff Sergeant David Mitchell. There's been an incident." Angela gasped, her knees buckling slightly. "Oh, God. No." Steve steadied her with a hand. His own voice trembled. "What kind of incident, Colonel?" 3 days ago, an IED detonated near his vehicle. The air vanished. The studio, once alive with light, fell silent. The audience sat frozen. Angela's family rushed to her side, tears already forming. Then the colonel continued. "Mr. Harvey, I need you to know that Staff Sergeant Mitchell is alive." Steve exhaled sharply, his hand gripping the phone tighter. "Alive?" "He was injured," the colonel said, "but he's alive. And the reason I'm calling now is because I have someone here who needs to talk to his wife." Steve turned toward Angela, tears gathering in his eyes. "Angela, honey, he's okay. He's alive, and he wants to talk to you." Angela took the phone with trembling hands. "David? David, is that you?" Through the static came a voice faint but steady. "Hey, beautiful. I'm okay. I'm okay." Angela dropped to her knees, sobbing. "Oh my God! They said there was an incident." I thought, "I know, baby. But I'm coming home. My tour's over. I'm done. I got hurt bad enough they're sending me home, but not bad enough that I won't heal. Baby, I'm coming home." The studio exploded in applause and tears. Steve wiped his eyes. The crew cried openly. Even the cameras seemed to shake. But what happened next? No one would ever forget. Angela was still on her knees, both hands clutching the phone like it was her only anchor to the world. Her sobs echoed softly across the stage, the kind that came from deep inside, from months of fear and silent prayers. The crowd was completely still, not even the sound of a breath, only the soft hum of the studio lights, and a single woman whispering the words she had been waiting more than a year to say, "You're coming home?" There was a pause. Then David's voice, tired, cracked, but smiling, came through the phone. "That's right, baby. I'm coming home. For good." And then he said something that made the air stand still. "Angela, I need you to turn around." For a second, no one moved. Even Steve looked puzzled, his eyebrows furrowing. Angela slowly turned, and then froze. From the far side of the stage, walking slowly under the bright lights, came a man in uniform. A soldier, left arm in a sling, bandages on his neck. His posture straight, his eyes locked on one thing, her, Staff Sergeant David Mitchell. Angela's breath left her body in a single, broken gasp. For one moment, she didn't move. It was as if her mind refused to believe what her heart already knew. Then, the phone slipped from her hand, and she ran. The cameras barely kept up. The audience rose to their feet. The studio filled with cries, cheers, gasps, the sound of hearts breaking open. Angela collided with David, throwing her arms around his shoulders. He winced from the pain in his wounded arm, but pulled her close with everything he had left. She buried her face in his chest, whispering through tears, "You're real. You're real. Oh my God, you're really here." David held her tighter, voice trembling. "I'm home, baby. I'm home for good." When she finally pulled back, her hands went to his face, touching the bandages like they were sacred. "How are you here?" David smiled through his tears. "The colonel pulled some strings. When they found out you were going to be on Family Feud, they arranged my transfer. I've been at Walter Reed for 2 days getting cleared." He turned toward Steve, who stood frozen mid-stage, the phone still in his hand. "Your producers helped make it happen," David said softly. "They made this possible." Steve blinked hard, wiping his face with the back of his hand. "You knew?" he asked his producer. Marcus Freeman nodded, his own eyes red. "We got the call from the Pentagon yesterday. They wanted to surprise her, but when we found out it was Lizzie's birthday today." He hesitated, his voice catching. "We couldn't let this moment pass." The entire studio was crying now, audience, crew, even the lighting team. Steve stepped forward, his voice low and thick with emotion. "Staff Sergeant Mitchell, welcome home, soldier." David tried to salute with his good arm, but Steve reached out and stopped him. No, Steve said gently, his own hand trembling. "You don't salute me. We salute you." The audience stood again, clapping, crying, cheering, a sound that felt less like applause and more like gratitude. When the noise quieted, Steve took a breath. "How bad, son?" "What happened?" David straightened a little, still holding Angela's hand. IED hit our vehicle. I was lucky. 2 of my men weren't. But they're alive. I've got shrapnel in my shoulder, burns on my neck, but nothing that won't heal. Nothing that prayer and time can't fix. And you're done now? Steve asked softly. No more deployments? David nodded. Medical discharge. 20 years of service. It's time to be a father and a husband, not a headline. Angela, still crying, whispered through her tears, Lizzie doesn't even know you're home. Oh my God, it's her birthday, she doesn't know. David smiled. Actually, about that. Before anyone could speak, a small voice came from the side of the stage. Mommy? Every head turned. Standing there, holding her grandmother's hand, was Lizzie Mitchell, a bright-eyed 10-year-old with her mother's smile and her father's eyes. Angela gasped. Lizzie, Mom, you brought her. The little girl's eyes widened when she saw the man in uniform. Daddy? David's whole face crumpled. He sank to his knees, pain shooting through his shoulder, but he didn't care. He opened his good arm wide. Come here, baby girl. Lizzie ran. She threw herself into his arm, and he caught her, holding her tight, pressing his face into her hair as tears streamed down his cheeks. Happy birthday, princess, he whispered. Daddy's home. Lizzie pulled back just enough to look into his eyes. For real home? Or just visiting home? David smiled through tears. For real home. Forever home. The audience lost it. The sound of crying and applause filled every corner of the studio. Angela dropped beside them, wrapping her arms around both of them. And the 3 of them stayed there on the studio floor of Family Feud. A family finally whole again. Steve had to take off his glasses, his voice cracking as he spoke. Ladies and gentlemen, he said softly, we're not just playing a game anymore. We're witnessing something holy. He turned toward his producer. We're not cutting this. Not 1 second of it. Then, looking back at David and Angela, his tone shifted gentle but firm. David, you're coming home injured. What do you and your family need? David shook his head. Mr. Harvey, we didn't come here for help. This ain't charity, Steve interrupted. It's gratitude. What do you need? Angela hesitated, then spoke quietly. Our house. We're behind on the mortgage. With David gone, I had to cut back on work. And then when Lizzie got sick last year, the medical bills. Steve didn't let her finish. Done, he said flatly. We'll take care of it. David tried to protest. Mr. Harvey. No. Listen to me, Steve said, his voice rising. You've spent 20 years taking care of America. Now it's our turn to take care of you. He turned toward the audience. How many of y'all got family in the military? Hands went up. How many of y'all know someone who served? Almost every hand in the studio lifted. Steve nodded. That's what I thought. When one of us comes home hurt, we all step up. The crowd erupted, and then, in the middle of all that emotion, something even more remarkable happened. The Garcia family, their competitors, walked across the stage. The grandmother, Maria Garcia, a small woman with silver hair and kind eyes, wrapped Angela in a hug. My husband was in Vietnam, she whispered. I know this pain, mija. You're not alone. For the first time in Family Feud history, 2 families stood together not as opponents, but as one. Steve looked around, his eyes glistening under the lights. You know what? He said, his voice breaking. We're throwing out the rules. Both families are going to play this next round together. Whatever they win, they split. And my foundation, he paused, overcome with emotion, is going to match it and multiply it by 10. The crowd gasped. David stared in disbelief. Angela covered her mouth, crying again. Steve turned toward them, his voice steady now. Sometimes God puts you in a position to be a blessing to others. Today, that's what this is. And for a moment, under the bright studio lights, surrounded by tears and applause, Family Feud wasn't just a show anymore. It was a homecoming, a miracle, a reminder that love always finds its way home. The lights dimmed softly as Steve wiped his face, took a deep breath, and stepped back toward the 2 families, now standing together, the Mitchells and the Garcias, side by side. This wasn't a competition anymore. It was communion. You could feel it in the room, something sacred, unplanned, undeniable. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate before moving, as if they too understood they were capturing something far greater than television. Steve looked around, his voice trembling just enough to betray what he felt. "All right," he said quietly. "Let's play. One more round." The audience applauded softly, not the usual roar of excitement, but something reverent, like applause in a church after a prayer. Angela stood beside David, one arm around Lizzie, the other clutching her husband's hand. Across from them, Maria Garcia nodded through tears, whispering a quiet prayer for them in Spanish. The game began, but it wasn't the same. Every question felt deeper, as if the answers were speaking straight from the heart. "Name something that brings people together," Maria answered without hesitation. "Faith. Name something a soldier carries that isn't in his bag." David looked down for a moment before saying, "Hope. Name something a family learns when they've been through hard times." Angela whispered, "To never take a single day for granted." By the time the final buzzer sounded, the scoreboard lit up, but no one even looked at it. The entire studio audience was on its feet again, cheering and crying. Steve took the microphone, his voice shaking. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said softly, "this right here, this is what family looks like. This is what America looks like." Applause thundered through the studio. He turned toward the two families, smiling through tears. "Y'all didn't just win a game today. You won something a whole lot bigger." He paused, took a breath, then spoke directly to the camera. "I said we'd do something special, and I meant it. Whatever these families won today, they're gonna split it right down the middle. And my foundation," his voice caught, "is gonna match it and multiply it by 10. Both families will receive $100,000. "Mr. Harvey," David began softly, his voice breaking. "You don't have to—" "Yes, I do," Steve said, stepping closer. "Because taking care of folks like you is what this platform is for." The audience erupted again, people clapping, standing, hugging each other. Steve turned to David. "Now, son, you mentioned two soldiers, the ones who were with you when that IED went off. Tell me about them." David swallowed hard, his voice lowered. "Specialist Thompson and Private Rodriguez. They're both at Walter Reed. Thompson lost his leg. Rodriguez has a brain injury. They're good men, Mr. Harvey. Just kids, really 20 and 22. They've got a long road ahead." Steve nodded, his face solemn. "And their families? They taken care of?" David shook his head slowly. "Thompson's got a wife and a baby. Rodriguez's parents barely speak English. They're trying to navigate everything on their own." Steve's next words came out, steady, deliberate, like a promise. "Then we're taking care of them too. All of them." David blinked, stunned. "Sir?" Steve stepped forward, putting a hand on his shoulder. "Nobody gets left behind. Isn't that what y'all say?" David stood taller despite his injuries. His voice was firm now. "Yes, sir. Nobody gets left behind." The crowd exploded again, rising to their feet, applause echoing off every wall of the studio. What happened next didn't feel like television anymore. It felt like revival, something pure, something healing. People hugged strangers. Veterans in the audience stood and saluted. Mothers wept. Fathers wiped their eyes quietly. And there, at the center of it all, the Mitchell family holding one another in the middle of the stage became more than just contestants on a show. They became a symbol of everything that Family Feud was supposed to be about: love, unity, resilience, and faith. Steve looked out at the audience, his voice trembling. "Ladies and gentlemen, this isn't just about money. This is about remembering who we are, people who lift each other up when life knocks us down." He paused, looking back at David, Angela, and Lizzie. "And today, we saw love win." The crowd cheered again, louder this time. Angela turned to Steve, her voice soft but steady. "You didn't just change our lives, Mr. Harvey. You reminded us that kindness is still real." Steve smiled, tears glistening in his eyes. "No, ma'am. You reminded us." The lights began to fade. The audience clapped one last time, long and hard, until the studio was filled with something that didn't feel like entertainment anymore. It felt like healing. That day, Family Feud stopped being a game show. It became a moment of grace, a story that would outlive every round, every laugh, every prize. It became a story left behind. When the cameras stopped rolling, no one left. Not the audience, not the crew, not even Steve Harvey. Something sacred had happened inside that Atlanta studio, something that no one could put into words. People lingered in their seats, strangers wiping tears from their eyes, holding hands with people they had never met. The laughter that had once filled the room had transformed into something quieter, deeper, the sound of gratitude. Steve stood in the middle of the stage, still holding his cue cards, but the show was over. He looked around the studio, his voice breaking the silence. "I've been blessed to host a lot of moments in my career. But this one..." He paused, his eyes glistening. "This one reminded me why I do what I do. For people, for connection, for love." Angela was holding David's hand as if letting go might make him disappear. Lizzie had fallen asleep against her father's chest, her tiny hand gripping the edge of his uniform. The Garcias stood nearby, Maria wiping tears with the corner of her sleeve, whispering prayers of thanks in Spanish. This wasn't just television anymore. It was testimony. When the episode aired 3 weeks later, America stopped to watch. It began like every other Family Feud. Laughter, cheers, Steve's quick wit, but halfway through, when the phone rang, the world seemed to stop breathing. And by the time David Mitchell walked onto that stage, millions of people watching from their living rooms were crying. That night, the show broke every ratings record in its history. But that wasn't the story. The real story was what happened next. Messages poured in tens of thousands, from veterans who had served, from wives who had waited, from children who had grown up on video calls and deployment schedules. One message read, "I watched that episode with my son. His father didn't come home, but seeing David did something for him that I couldn't. It gave him hope again." Another came from a retired soldier. "Thank you for showing America what service really looks like, not just the uniform, but the families who wear invisible ones every day." And then came something even bigger. Donations began flooding in, not to Family Feud, but directly to the families Steve had mentioned. The Mitchells, Specialist Thompson, Private Rodriguez. A tech billionaire and veteran paid off the mortgages for all 3 families. A car company donated a specially equipped vehicle for Thompson. A medical foundation covered Rodriguez's neurological treatment in full. Schools across the country started hosting Family Feud Fridays to raise funds for military families. It became more than an episode. It became a movement. 3 months later, Steve brought the Mitchell family back on his talk show. The audience gave them a standing ovation before they even spoke. David walked in. No sling this time, his steps sure, his face glowing with the quiet peace of a man who had been given a second chance. Angela followed, radiant with calm strength. And Lizzie, now 11, ran ahead of them, waving to the crowd, her laughter pure and full of light. Steve greeted them like family. "Look at y'all," he said with a smile that barely hid his tears. "How's life treating you these days?" David chuckled softly. "It's been an adjustment," he admitted. "I still wake up at 4 every morning like I'm on base. Still fold my socks tight. Still make the bed with hospital corners. But now..." He looked at Angela. "Now, when I open my eyes, she's right there. And when Lizzie wakes from a nightmare, I'm home to tell her it's okay. That's all that matters." Angela smiled. "He's here, Mr. Harvey. That's the greatest gift." The crowd erupted in applause. Steve nodded, his voice soft. "And your injuries? How are you holding up?" David flexed his left hand, scarred but strong. 60% mobility, some permanent damage. But I can still hug my wife. I can still play catch with my daughter. That's more than enough." Steve's eyes filled again. "And the other 2 soldiers, Thompson and Rodriguez?" David's face brightened. "Thompson just danced at his wedding first dance, prosthetic leg and all. Rodriguez recognized his parents last week for the first time since the blast. Miracles, Mr. Harvey. Real miracles." The audience wept. Angela reached over, holding her husband's hand. "We've started a support group for military families," she said. "We've had so many people reach out after the show, not asking for money, just needing to know they're not alone. Steve nodded, deeply moved. And that's why we created something after your episode aired, he said. The Family Feud Military Family Fund. A portion of every episode now goes to help military families in crisis. Angela gasped. David blinked back tears. Steve smiled gently. Your story didn't just change your life, son. It changed this show. It changed us. David stood up, despite Steve's protests, and saluted him. You gave us dignity, he said quietly. You didn't treat us like a charity case. You treated us like Americans who still had something to give. That means everything. Steve pressed a hand over his heart. No, son. You reminded us who we're supposed to be. The studio was silent except for sniffles, and the sound of applause beginning to rise again, soft, then growing. Then Steve turned toward Lizzie. Sweetheart, I hear somebody just had another birthday. Lizzie giggled. 11. Well, Steve said, smiling, we can't let that go without a celebration. The curtain lifted. Behind it, a birthday cake, balloons, and two men standing side by side, Thompson and Rodriguez. The audience erupted in cheers as David froze, then ran to them. Rodriguez, speaking slowly but clearly, said, Staff Sergeant Mitchell saved us that day, pulled us both out before the second explosion. We wouldn't be here without him. Thompson, balanced on his prosthetic, nodded. This man lives what he says no one left behind. And Mr. Harvey, you showed us America still believes that too. The three men hugged, surrounded by tears, applause, and love. It was more than a reunion. It was a resurrection, a living proof that light always finds its way through the ashes. That night, Steve ended the show quietly. No jokes, no credits rolling too fast. Just a single line. Sometimes the best prize isn't money. It's the moment you realize you're finally home. Months passed, yet that one moment, that single phone call continued to echo across America. Clips of the episode flooded social media. Veterans' halls played it on repeat. Schools used it to teach empathy. Pastors referenced it in Sunday sermons. It wasn't just television anymore. It had become a living reminder of what grace looks like when it walks into a room. The story of the Mitchell family had found its way into the hearts of millions. But for them, the miracle didn't end when the cameras stopped rolling. It had only just begun. A new beginning. By autumn, the Mitchells' home in Texas had been repaired and fully paid off. The same neighbors who used to wave from a distance now stopped by, regularly dropping off casseroles, mowing the lawn, fixing the fence. David, once the man who lived by military discipline, was learning to live by love again. He started volunteering at the local VA center not as a patient, but as a counselor. He spoke to soldiers just returning home, his voice steady, his story raw. The war doesn't always end when you come home, he'd tell them. Sometimes the battlefield is your own heart, but you don't have to fight it alone. Angela had gone back to school, studying to become a nurse. Inspired by the hands that saved her husband, she wanted to be that same hope for others. And Lizzie, the little girl who once cried herself to sleep, wishing her daddy would come home now, slept soundly every night, her father tucking her in with the same promise he made on national television, Daddy's home. For real. Forever. Ripples of kindness. But the Mitchells weren't the only ones changed. Because of that one episode, more than $1 million was raised for military families through Steve's Family Feud Military Family Fund. Churches, schools, and companies joined in, inspired not by charity, but by gratitude. Specialist Thompson now coached adaptive sports for veterans, racing with his prosthetic leg, and calling it proof that faith runs faster than fear. Private Rodriguez continued his recovery slowly, steadily, and when he could finally speak clearly again, his first words were simple: tell them thank you. Letters kept coming from parents, soldiers, and strangers. One, written by an 8-year-old boy, said, "My dad is gone too, but I saw your show, and now I believe he's with me even when I can't see him." It was signed, "Your friend, Matthew." The man who answered the call. In his dressing room, Steve Harvey kept one photo framed above his mirror, a candid shot taken by a camera operator who couldn't stop crying that day. It wasn't posed, it wasn't staged. It was the exact moment David stepped onto that stage. Angela collapsed into his arms, and Lizzie ran toward him like a beam of light. Every morning, before taping another show, Steve looked at that photo. He once told his producer, Marcus Freeman, "That picture reminds me what this job is really about. Not the laughter, not the fame, it's about connection. It's about people seeing themselves in someone else's story." When asked about it later, Steve said in an interview, "In 30 years of television, I've had a lot of moments. But that one, that call, that family, it changed me. It reminded me that sometimes the best thing you can do for someone is just answer when life calls." The story lives on. 6 months later, Stories Left Behind, the Storytelling Project, born from that very moment, released a special feature titled The Call That Stopped Family Feud. It didn't just retell the story. It honored every unseen family who had lived a version of it in silence. Clips of soldiers reuniting with loved ones played across the screen, some at airports, some in hospital rooms, some in school gymnasiums. Over it, Steve's voice narrated, "Heroes don't always wear uniforms. Sometimes they wear aprons, or work clothes, or hospital badges. Sometimes they're just people who keep believing, even when the world feels heavy." The video ended with a single line, "Sometimes the greatest battles are won at home when love refuses to surrender." It became one of the most watched videos in Stories Left Behind history. Epilogue: The Quiet Victory. The Mitchells still watch Family Feud every evening, but they don't watch for the laughter or the competition. They watch to remember the day the world stopped and started again, because one man answered a phone call that changed everything. Sometimes, between commercial breaks, Angela glances at David and whispers, "Can you believe all this started with a phone call?" And David always smiles. "Yeah," he says softly, "a phone call and a miracle." Because some stories aren't just meant to be told, they're meant to be remembered. This is a Stories Left Behind original.